Hi, everybody. How are you?
Hey, Professor. Good, good. How about yourself? You feeling better?
Yeah, I was working on stuff on Sunday, and then by like 3 a.m. I was not feeling good. So
Yeah.
I was like, yeah, maybe I'll just take something. And then by 8, like I didn't think that I would last through a Zoom session. So I was like, yeah, I'm just gonna let them know. But I'm better. Um It's just the change of weather and then lack of sleep, that got me.
Yeah.
Yeah. How are you doing?
Good, good. Just I got 980 points for NCL
Oh, that's awesome. That's
for
good.
the individual. I mean, I got 846 place out of 5,500 or 6,000 students or people.
Oh,
I
that's
mean,
good.
for being my
Well,
first one, it's not too
yeah.
bad.
Yeah. That's better than the team that I coach last year. Um they were actually it was last year. There were like 3 of them and they barely participated, so
Uh,
yeah. I just want you and Ray and some of the people to know that we just got 2 new employers for the internship, the Cascade.
oh, that's cool.
Yeah, so we send out your resume and the ones that you guys for the ones that were approved.
Yeah.
So hopefully they'll get back to us. I'm meeting with one more on Friday.
The
So
summer one? The summer?
I'm sorry. Yeah, it's the summer of no, yeah, it was from the last one.
Uh-huh.
So we had 2 companies that went through, and then they screened and they picked the ones that they picked.
Yeah.
And so we're down to like 7 students in the pool left.
Uh-huh.
And then so you, Ray, and a couple other students in this class were part of that.
That's cool.
Um, yeah, so we got some really cool new companies. Let me get the smart form dropped into the chat in case anybody else want to apply. Hold on one second. And then we'll talk about class today. Yeah, so I just finished out with a couple interns, and then there were one that were in the queue. COVID kind of slowed us down, so let me get the link here.
What about the apprenticeship? How's that going?
Uh, it's going, I guess. Jennifer still has to set up a couple of things, but she's telling me that she wants to uh test some of the students. Um, I have to touch back with the dean about if we wanted to do a work experience course with it, because we talked about doing work experience course with the internship. So that way, regardless whether you get hired or not, you still get credit information for it.
Yeah.
And if you get hired, you just get paid. So um, here, let me drop in the link for the rest of you who wants to still apply. Chris and a couple other students that applied to this. And then we went through and we approved some of the applications. So this goes back to the Department of Defense, and they check the background, and then they authorize the hiring process. So the process does take a little bit. If you're interested, there are companies that are looking for programming students in general. I have one. I can't go into much details because the Department of Defense contracted company, but there's one that does image recognition, and they're working for like this is a different company than the last one that specifically did camera, but this one is they do like a data analysis with imaging, um and it really feeds into the database for terrorist database, like how airport and military and some of these government agencies able to recognize terrorists. And then another one is doing some project based stuff. So it's Cascade is computer science and cybersecurity. A lot of the companies are not ready to do cybersecurity because they're still in development and research stage. So it's a good practice for all of you if you're interested to help them test tools. Some of them are testing hardware, some of them are testing like virtual reality system for military training, some of them are testing camera, some of them are testing software. So it's a vast, and they're all small to medium sized contracted business with the DoD. I had advised a few students that had gone through it. One just fully completed all his hours and he recorded the video and he really enjoyed the experience. He learned a lot. So if you are interested, make sure you complete all the sections, because if you don't complete all the sections, automatically it gets disqualified. So if you got disqualified last time because there was not things that were completed, you can reapply and then we resubmit. So we have fundings until June of next year. For, we just picked up San Francisco City College funding because they dropped out. So we renewed the contract from November and forward. And then they're even interested in some business processes, documentation. So there are different areas. So you don't have to be super technical. But in the process, you will learn a lot and you get paid to do it. And it's like 15 an hour and you work remotely. So some of these companies right now, we're looking at Central California companies, Santa Barbara, Sacramento, so anyway, just to kind of touch back on that. Sorry about Monday. I was not feeling well. And yesterday was my birthday and I just like didn't really do anything. But I was teaching a class and it was my internet was just spotty and I realized that they had a Dodger game that happened, right? So people were celebrating. Okay. So I posted, let's talk about, let me get back to the CIS30. Let's talk about what we have in queue for this week and also what we need to plan for the upcoming week. You probably saw the project module that I released. I'm gonna turn off my video because my husband's teaching robotics upstairs and sometimes from now until 5 o'clock our internet gets like a little weird, but you will still be able to see my screen. Oh, thank you. Yeah, I'm 43. Time just flew so fast. Yeah, my goal in life was I wanted to get a doctorate degree by 40, which I achieved. I wanted earlier, but I couldn't do it because of family. But anyway, so everything's good. I guess, health just goes downhill at 40, So, all right, let's see. Thank you. Okay, so let's talk about what we have to do this week. And we are going to touch on polymorphism and inheritance in Python. I believe this chapter is probably the most complex chapter out of all the things, outside of a little bit on the exception you saw, but this is being used quite a bit for different areas, especially when you get into the data structure portion. So we want to talk about class and inheritance. Afterwards, I want to touch back on the course project. So my plan for next week is to go over UI and libraries a little bit with you, even though that's not in the text. I feel that it would be useful for different areas of application with Python libraries. And I will introduce you to some UI tools if you haven't worked with that already, like Kivy and TK. So we will touch back on how you can use some of the tools to create UI if you like. Now, at the end, I want to reserve some time to touch on the course project and give you the explanation. About week 13 and 14, I want to go over the final review. I will assign these as homework assignments. It kind of review everything that we've done, all the materials, so it will prepare you for the final exam. And the final exam date will be the 16th of December. It will be multiple choice, very similar to your quiz questions. And by the 16th, you need to submit all your project parts. The part one is actually due sometime near Thanksgiving. The reason why is it's mainly just, kind of encourage you to coordinate and document the project. I'm doing it a little bit different this semester compared to the priors. I'm using ePortfolio. I found that, in my prior experience, I taught for private institutions for many years, and they have always used ePortfolio for technical courses, and the students were very successful using ePortfolio. So I wanted to implement it, and we wanted to get that going for the guided pathway as part of the college plan. So I like for you to use the ePortfolio to really push a lot of your project online. You can use it as like, think of it like an online resume, and you can tie it back to your LinkedIn and a lot of things, and you can design and be creative and make it look nice. So anytime that you work on a project in your class, you should put it onto your ePortfolio. Like whether it's a writing essay that you did and you thought was excellent, you put it on there, because companies really looking for people that have soft skills, well-rounded, things that you work outside of class, projects, Raspberry Pi, Arduino, things that you've done for the community, you should share that. Okay. So to really showcase your skills beyond the classroom, possibly as well. So that's kind of giving you the overview of what I try to incorporate this semester. And then you will have potentially extra credit opportunity with the course survey for myself to read, and so I can do better in the next round. Okay, so that's kind of like the projection for the upcoming week, starting with this week. And then in week, also next week, just to make sure that we are on task with things for participation, because after week 11, I'm not going to do so much more lecture because I'm going to give you time to work on your project. I will still hold Zoom sessions for you to work with your team if needed, and also to touch back with me about project issues or any questions you have, kind of like an open forum environment. So I will post some discussion thread just to get you to participate and let me know how you're doing on your project. Okay, so that's something new that I'm implementing this semester, and it kind of give me um, the increase in the quality communication between the instructor and the students. That's what they're really looking at. So, but I care about how you would go through and achieve the objective of the of your project. So I wanted to incorporate some of that just to communicate with you and see how well you're doing. So we will follow up weekly on how we're doing on our project. Okay. All right. So unit 10 notes is on our last chapter of book 1. And that's going to cover class inheritance. It touches a little bit on polymorphism, and I edited the notes to add some other examples and other things. So we'll go over that. And then instead of doing lab and assignment, since we missed Monday, we're just going to incorporate both into one. That's going to be your unit 10 lab. Okay, so I see some chat information. Yeah, so you will find that Python is beautiful and such that there are a lot of really great libraries already pre-written. So a lot of the things that you just need to know how to incorporate the library, and then you have the flexibility to incorporate the component for UI in that. Okay, and then we will, if you get into the IoT, right now I assign another faculty to teach that, but if I do teach it, I would love to have it where you would design an interface for an actual IoT device. a smart device. And that will be something really cool to do, along with, program in the back, so that way it would sync a lot of the data back to the server, so you can, gather their geolocation, their usage, even if we're looking at health systems, like smartwatches and such. Those will be really cool to kind of do. And you can use different type of microboards to incorporate with some of that. But so let's talk about, do you have any questions for me? No questions. Okay. So let's talk about unit 10. Let me zoom in real quick. So the chapter begins with talking about polymorphism. And a lot of the examples floating on the internet really touch back on class inheritance. But just to strip it down and going back to the really object-oriented programming aspect, and as you learn some of this, if you took C++ or Java, we had used polymorphism in a different way. It's really tying back to the use of a single type entity. For example, like you can reuse a method, like the same method name, and you can update it throughout for different purposes. And in C++, you see some of this in overloading functions. The reason why I chose this, so that way it's a little bit more clear than just burying it in all the classes and such, which we will cover in the inheritance area. So what we can do is we can use a single type entity, okay? That could be a method, it could be an operator or an object, to represent different types, right? Depending on the direction of your program, what you wanted to do with it. So as we've seen in this simple example, you have a function called join, and then we just have these parameter A, B, and C. And then we just want to print out A, B, and C concatenated. Okay. Now, when you call on it, you are passing, the values 3, 3, and 4. These are integers. So once you define the function, and you would call on that function, and you would use the values in the parameter, so that way it can print out what you want here. So we would know 3 and 3 and 4, right? 3 plus 3 plus 4 is going to give you 10. But then what if we wanted to use a different type? Okay, and you see something similar to this in C++ with overloading. What if we want to use, a character in a string, right? Like A, B, and C. And so it's going to take that and convert it so that way it can print it as concatenated format. Okay, so let's see here. Here's my example. I'm just going to pull up Tony. Okay, this is the example that you see. And when we run this, it morphs, right? So we see that here, when we call on it, we're reusing the same function that we define. And here we have one type and then another type. So you can see a different type in application with that. So on the first one, when we call join and use 334, we're getting a 10. And then on the second one, when we call join, it's simply concatenate ABC, right? And it gives you ABC. Now, Python handles this a little bit different compared to other languages, to where it automates a lot of the stuff in the back. So it's passing some of the things in the back where we don't really see some of that, because they build it to handle a lot of that automatically. In C++ or Java, because it's, you have to start with specifying the type of the data. then you have to handle the type accordingly as you go through and incorporate that in your code. So the nice things about it is that you do see the morph, right? The polymorphism aspect of it. And this is the simplest example. And I try to really comb through and look at other examples if they were better. But I ended up kind of just rewrite this and just making sure that you can see how it's applied to different type of data. Okay, any question with this? Okay, so in the next part, then it goes into class. And as we touched on this last week, we started defining the class, right? And so this chapter kind of give us a little bit more meat, like a little bit more skeleton on how we really want to design and write our classes, define our classes. Because the point in having the class or multiple classes is to create the relationship between one or multiple classes. Okay, so we can have one-to-one and we have one-to-many, and we can have different levels of classes interworking. So here, just to do a quick review, when you define a class, you simply use the keyword class and then you give it a name. And use capital letter by practice. That's what we should use. So your first letter should be capital. And then in the suite, we can, include definition of our functions, tasks, things that you want to incorporate as part of that class. So now when you use init, right? So when you're doing def init, what you're doing is really build a constructor for that class, and basically you're blueprinting that class. Okay, so what we can do is we can lay it out and say that, oh, in this class we would have this method, right? We would have the members are variables, so it could be lists, and with that we can create an object to access the attributes in each class. Okay, so the whole point of having a class is to create an object, and with that object we can access different areas of that class suite. Okay, so it really outline the constructor really kind of lay out what everything would be, so that way the object can access different parts of it. Okay, so what would be considered as your class attributes? That would be your variables. Okay, and there's some difference between the instance and the class variable. So for the class variable, it says this variable is shared by all class instances and objects. And in some textbook and resources, they would refer to this as members. Okay. And then for the instance variable, that will be unique to the instance of a class. Okay. And that's important to highlight because it's specific to that instance. And it says it's typically defined within a method. So when you define the function for that particular class, and if you have the variable within that function, right, that would be considered an instance variable. And it's only going to be applicable to that instance. So outside of that class, it's inaccessible. Okay. Whereas if, we've done some of this. So let me see if I can open up another one. Sorry. Let me see if I can have something that's. Okay. So this one, I kind of threw it together, so sorry if it's, here's my class employee, okay? And I have a variable called employer, and I put MVC, okay? So when you do this, what we're doing here is we have a constructor. So when you do the def init, you establish a constructor, okay? And inside that, what you're saying is self ID, and you can give it any name. So here we're saying right? You cannot use ID here. I couldn't use ID here because ID is a keyword and it's not going to let you, right? It's going to throw an error. So when we say self ID is this is going to be considered a unique property for that class. Now this employer up here, this variable, that's attribute, and that can be a shared property. Okay, so if I create another class, what I can do is I have to create an object and for this class, and then be able to access the attribute for the class. Okay, so here what I have is mic. Mic is an object and it's part of employee class, and in here I simply pass 1111. So when we run this, right, it's, since I don't have anything print, what we can do is we can say object dot, right, and then whatever we want to access as, for that class. So this kind of gives you the very basics, so you can see that this is considered a shared property or an attribute, where this will be a unique property for that particular class. And so where you position that is really gonna differentiate, between one and the other. Okay, any question? Okay, so as it moves into attributes, and with the class attributes, you can have that link to the other classes, okay? And that allows us to build the objects that would be in common for the instances. So the whole point about having multiple classes is to be accessing various part, right, like of that class, like methods and different things. And you can have multiple objects for each class. We saw that already with just that one example I had, or even last week. And again, the instance attributes are not shared by objects. It's going to be unique. So every object has its own copy. Every object has its own copy of the instance attribute. Okay. And it's specific to that instance. Okay. Now, so class attributes, we talk about instance data attributes, and then you have the regular data attributes. These are going to be your class variables. You can define that. And it can be used like any other variable when you're creating a class. Okay, so let's look at this example real quick. So you have class ABC, and here's your variable XYZ, and you assign it a value, which is 10. Okay, so if we print this, what we can say is that this is the variable that contains data. It belongs to class ABC. So we simply do a print ABC. That's the class attributes. Okay. And here is the following, which is the variable dot XYZ. Now we can use it in operation. So we can say that ABC.xyz is ABC.xyz plus 1 or plus 100 or plus 500 or times 11, right? So we can implement it for operations and then we reprint it. So in this case, it's going to take 10 and it's going to do a +1, right? And that's going to give us 11. So when you write it like this, what it's saying is that that's going to be the data attributes of that class. Okay? Any question? No question. Okay, so there's some additional example with the class attributes. Okay, so here what you have is you declare a variable called count and you initialize it as 0. And this is going to be your class attribute. Then we define a function. Increase is our function name. Okay, and then we bring down the class name and the variable. So you have sample class.count, and we wanted to do an increase 1. Okay, here we create an object called S1, and that object, what we're going to do is we're going to use that object to call the method, right, which we previously defined, and then we print it. But when it does this, you have to use the .count to literally reference back to what you established in the class attribute. So that's used in the print there. Okay. Any question? Okay, so there's additional example with the second object, and it's the same, right? Just a repeat process for the second object. And so you can see the class attributes is different than the instance attribute. The instance attribute, you define it under the constructor. Okay, so we did this last week, right? When we did the self dot, okay? And you can name anything here, like what Chris and I mentioned. You can use another another identifier there, and it's still gonna, as long as you keep it the same, and it has to be in the first position. So when you do an instant attribute, that will be under the constructor. Okay. So this is a little bit different than the last one. So once we have the constructor, right, and the variables under that, what we can do is we can define our functions. We can use it as method. So down here, we would then bring down these, okay, so that way you can access name, okay, and you can access salary. So we print there, and then we have the object called E1, that's part of emp class. And then when we print it out, we simply use the object, right? Now this one is, this vars right here is a function that return dictionary attributes. So it gives you the key and the value. This is built in with Python. So if you have something that would set up as dictionary, like the key with the value, then you can simply use that with the object, and it should be able to bring down the content from that container. Or you can use dir. We saw this last time, right? And that kind of just give you the directory information where that exists. Okay. Any question?
Just one thing about the last lab. If we did use the class inheritance instead of instance inheritance, does that make it wrong? Because I believe
No,
I accidentally did use class inheritance instead for the
that's
student
fine.
one.
Yeah, that's fine. I originally only wanted you to do the one class, so you didn't have to do the class inheritance. But if you implemented that, that's fine. That kind of actually prepare you for this week. So
Okay, cool.
yeah, I don't mind as long as you're using class and you can, because it's really hard to say that, it's wrong or right. It's how you approach it, really, right? There's no right or wrong way. Some people, they program, they go about solving a problem with more lines. It doesn't necessarily mean that it will perform better or less. Um, so, yeah, as long as you meet the objective, I'm okay with that. Okay.
Okay, cool.
Okay. Okay. So as you can see now, the difference between the instance, right, and the class attributes. Okay. Now, me personally, when I write in Java or C++ or even Python, I use Constructor because it's easier for me to kind of map things back to where, because when you're looking at more of a complex program, it's better to kind of blueprint it. And especially when you have, many classes. So that way you kind of have an idea of how you can go through the hierarchy of the class. And you will see this in today's notes and exercises. Now, not everybody would have the same approach as I would, right? So I was talking to my husband yesterday, and he's like, well, I don't always use a constructor in like a program like what you're doing. And I said, okay, well, so he was, explaining his perspective on it. So really, there's no right or wrong way as long as you're still getting to the result or you achieving what you're trying to achieve. I think that should be okay. But for me though, I felt like it would be more clear in my mind if I use a constructor and if I use instances, compared to other people, they simply just use class attributes. So, okay, so that kind of give you two perspective on things. And here it talks about inheritance. As we go into this area, we know that we're going to incorporate one or more classes in our project in our program. So it says programming classes that have no inherent features are really object-based programming. You just build the object like what we did last week. That was object-based programming. Okay, where you have each object, like for the fruits, I illustrated that, for the cars, etc. Now, when you get into object-oriented programming is where you would work with inheritance across multiple classes. So what you can do is you can use one class and pass it to the subclass, the parent to the child, or the base to the derived class. That's what's called, right? Now, even if you overwrite the existing functionality in the child without affecting the parent class, you're still operating within the object-oriented programming approach. Okay? So when you look at these jobs and they're asking for specific programming techniques or approach, right? Like they must know how to do object-oriented programming in Python, Java, C++, etc., right? What does that really mean? Knowing how to work with inheritance. Okay. And this is widely used still, even though, sometimes people are moving away from that perspective where, but it's implemented across. And so Python coming back to, because it's still built on C and C++, what you see is we're still approaching it with an object-oriented programming approach. Okay. So you would have the highest class or the base class at the top. That will be your parent class. Then under that, you will have another class or a subclass, also known as the derived class. And sometimes people refer to this as the child class. Sometimes you would have multiple children, right? You can have one parent and three, so one parent class and three subclasses. Or you can have one-to-one, one parent and one child. Okay, so when you have a one-to-one, you would have a single inheritance, meaning that we have a one base and a one derived class. Okay, so we would start with that exercise first this session. Or you can have multi-level. Okay, you can have multi-level where you would have, and I break this down right here. Okay, so I'm going to go to the image real quick and I'm going to come back to that. Okay, so here is your multiple inheritance. You can have two parents, two base, and one child. Okay, so I can access some of this and then some of this in the derived. Okay, then you can also have multi-level where you have the base, the intermediate, and the derived. This is the you have the parent, the child, and the grandchild. Okay, so you have 3 generations there. Okay, that's multi-level. So multiple, meaning that you can inherit from multiple classes at once. Multi-level means that it would goes from one to the next to the next. Okay, and I'm going to show you some example with that. Okay, and I copy and paste some of the code in there. And then you also have hierarchical. You can have, like earlier, like I said, you can have one parent and you can have 3 children, one base and 3 derived at the same level. Okay, like this. Okay, so let's go back and touch on the single one real quick. So in the single inheritance, when you have the subclass, it can inherit the methods and the attributes from the base or the parent. And what you can do is you can use the super function to specify, right? That would be specify the class inheritance for the methods and the property of the parents. So here, this is saying that the class student is a subclass of person. So the parent class is called person. And the student class is a subclass. We have the constructor. Now, instead of typing out person here, what you can do is for Python, it uses super, and Java has that too, right? Other languages had it too, where it uses super. So you can say that it's going to inherit, right, F name and L name from the person. Okay, those are the attributes. Okay. Now, if you wanted to add the properties after you have that line, you can go in and say, oh, I wanted to add one more thing to the student. I can put the graduation year, right? Like we would want to say the student first name, last name, and the year they graduated. So in the person class, it has first name and last name. In the student class, we wanted to bring down first name and last name to access those attributes, but we wanted to also add graduation year, which is 2019. Okay. So then the next stage would be that we can use the parameter, plug that in. So I can say the first name is Mike and the last name is Olson, and the graduation year would be 2019. Okay. So importantly, that's different from that last week is that not that we just have the constructor, the init. what we have to do is we have to specify that the subclass would use the super function here. Then if you wanted to be able to add another property to that child class, you can do so. You can add more, right? And then after that, we would be able to use the parameter. Question?
I have a question here.
Yes.
And in last class, I saw that class you gave name student. There are no parameter in the parentheses.
Yes.
This class today you have to put a present at. So what different?
So when you do this become a subclass. Okay.
Oh, this
Because
subclass.
yeah, there would be another class before this that would be person, and in person we already have F name and L name. So in the second class, if it's a subclass, you would reference the first class by putting it inside here. Okay. So student is a subclass of person.
Okay.
Okay. Yeah, last week we didn't have the inheritance set up, so that's the main difference. And also another difference is that here we have to say that it's part of another class by using the super. Okay. And then the coordinates attributes. Okay. Other questions? Now you can also add methods to the subclass, right? You can define another method. And then because we don't want to just have it exactly the same as the parent class or the base class, right? The second class can have other properties. So what it's showing you here is that you can add, right? You can use parameter, you can add methods to the subclass. And in this, we can bring down the attributes from the first class and then also add in new information, new data. Okay. Any question? So let's, yes, question?
I kind of have a silly question. If in Web Advisor, I can only have one major at a time, and I have to have admissions at a second major, well, could I assume that based on their programming that that's single inheritance?
No, I think that they put the limitations with the conditions that from you as an account for the user, it's only access one area. Like that one, because for a second user, they have higher privilege. So they can have multiple, so it overrides it.
Okay, so it's probably a privilege.
Yeah, so it ties back to the actual account membership.
Okay.
So if you're looking at like, so your account is only gonna have like, they can only select so many options, and that's how they program it to be, right?
Okay.
Like it,
Right.
yeah. So from a list, it's only allowing you to select one from the UI, but a counselor, right? They can go in and they can select multiple. So they have an additional option select for the selection choices. They're able to click multiple for that instance. Okay. Now, if you're looking at like, okay, so how would they do this from a class perspective? Yeah, they can use, you have your account accessing a specific property under that particular class. But then another account, like a counselor account, able to use multiple objects in that same class. Okay. Because then it would store and then it would bring it over. Now, once they save it, then it's going to update the student profile, right? Because they have to override it. It has to save over, it updates the student profile. and then it's gonna be able to show you display, but you don't have a choice in selecting multiple. Okay,
Okay,
so yes,
So the second major would be considered another object.
yes. Or if you know, and we don't really see how it could be just append to a list. You know,
Okay,
like you
yes.
would be able to only append one where they can append multiple to the list. So we you know, yeah, if you wanted to take it to a class and object perspective, yeah, so you can only have that one attribute as a student, where the counselor would have multiple attributes. So they're able to have multiple attributes for that parameter, where
Okay,
you can only have one parameter. Okay, so yeah, there would be like so many ways that how that would be created, but you know, so I'm assuming that, and Web Advisor, it's, you know, they transition it to really accommodate some of the things we need, because originally it was very simplified. So let's see. Multiple
Thank you.
inheritance. You're welcome. Let me see if I can find some example. Oh, here's the super one. Oh, I don't want to use this one. Let me use a better one to show you. So I wanted to lead this into the multiple inheritance because when I pulled this example, I found a lot of the issues. Okay, so let's look at this. This one is good. So you have class 1. So this is the base class. Okay. Let me tap it out. So this is your base class, class 1. And in it, we would define a method M1. And we simply, for that function, we just want to print that it's in class 1. And then I have another class called class 2. This is a child, a subclass of class 1. Okay. And then I have a class called class 3. It's also a child of class 1. Okay, so this parent have 2. And then I have a next class called class 4. And in class 4, it's a subclass of class 2 and class 3. So this is the grandchild. Okay. And as you notice, I'm not using init. I'm not, you know, nothing crazy and fancy, right? So we simply have method in each one. Now, then we would create an object for class 4, the grandchild. Then from this point, what we're going to do is we're going to say, okay, then we're going to access the M4 method. Then, so after that, we say, okay, so we're going to then access the method, the M3 method, and then M2 method and M1. So when I run this, okay, it shows that it's going to print the class 4, of course, because it's saying here that it's accessing the M4, right? So this object right here is able to access all the classes through the inheritance. First, M4 or class 4 is part of, it's a subclass of 3 and 2, and 2 and 3 is part of class 1. Okay, so I can simply, yes.
I have a question. Can you put object equal class 1? You call class 1 co-parent. What happens?
Yeah. So if you change this and make an object that's part of class 1, Okay, let me save and run this. Okay, it's not gonna be able to access M4. Why? Why is it throwing that error? It's because it's at M1, right? It's only gonna be correlated. It's have relationship. There's only two subclass under class 1, class 2, and class 3. Okay. So, so when you create the object, what you want to do is because this is inheriting from 2 and 3, and 2 and 3 is inheriting from class 1. Class 1 is not inheriting from class 4. So therefore it's throwing this, it's saying that it's not able to access class 1. So when you do it this way,
if you delay the object .m4 should be works.
I'm sorry?
If you delay the object .m4 should be works if you put a class 1 because
Like in here?
yeah, if you delayed that that M4, so you put object equal class 1 and your object .m4 you delayed that.
Okay, so
Yes,
let's comment out the M4, okay, and see. Yes, it should work because because class 1, right? Class 2 inherits from class 1, class 3 inherits from class 1. When you make the object in class 4.
No, you make a class 1. This happen because it connect to class 1. Every object equal class 1. See what happened.
Like this?
Is that one? Yeah.
Okay. You're still gonna
It
get
works?
an error. It doesn't go back up to class 1 because what you're saying is that your object is in class 1 and you're trying to access class 2, which inherits from class 1. And class 3 inherits from class 1. So no, it's not. Yeah, it's not gonna be able to access the other ones if you tie the object to the base class. So you have to, so if I make this as part of class 2, okay, it's not going to be able to access class 3. Why? Because class 3 and class 2 is at the same level. Because you have this at the top and then these two are at the same level. Okay?
Okay.
Yeah. So if we make it in the grandchild, what we can do is we can see the inheritance across all the classes. Okay, so in this one, this is a case of multiple inheritance. You got the parent, the base class here, okay, the two children, 2 and 3, which inherits from the parents, and then the grandchild. Now, if you make it in 2 or 3, what will happen is you can only access 1 and 3. So let's say if I make it on the object in class 3, then I can only access 1 and 3, not 2. Because these two are inheriting from class 1. Okay? Question. So at the lowest level, the grandchild, if you make it like this, it's able to access the method. Why? Because 4, it inherits from 2 and 3, and 2 and 3 inherits from the 1. Right? Top down. So you have class 1, right, is inherited by 2 and 3, and then 4 inherits by 2 and 3. Okay, question? Okay, so that gives you an illustration of your multiple inheritance. And it tells you here that a child class or a subclass can inherit methods and attributes from multiple classes. Okay, and that would be the functionality and the features. So What it's doing here is it's using what's called the method resolution order, your MRO, and it would prevent the precedence on ordering with that. So now what's the difference between that example and let me see with the constructor? So I'm going to show you multiple inheritance with the constructor. Okay, so in a similar sense, I have a class A. Here, I did an init, and then we have an instance for class A, right? We have var A is 1. Then I print A. Then I have class B. Class B is a subclass of A, right? It inherits from A. You can see that here. Then in class B, I have var B2. Construct. And since it's a subclass, we have to use the super here. Okay. And notice the init at this level, you don't need to put the self. You leave it empty. And then we print B for class B. Class C is part of class B. It's a subclass of B. Okay. And in class C, we have var C is 3. And we wanted to use super. This gives, it's just a function that we would say that it's a subclass, and we don't have to specify which class it's of except for right here. So here what we have is we just specify super, init, print C. And then we create an object for C. So let's run this. Okay. So what it's doing is that, yes, it's going to go A, B, C. Why is it doing A, B, C? It's printing A here because that's the base class. Okay. And B is part of A. So it's accessing from the bottom up. It's going to go to B. It's going to go to A. And so therefore, it's going to be able to give you the base class, the intermediate class, and the object exists in the derived class, class C. Okay, so it's the object is in class C. However, it's able to access B and A through the inheritance.
Okay.
Okay, does that help? Any question? So that shows you how you can use instances, right? And how you can have a constructor and carry it through with the inheritance. So part of this is a requirement for your project. I expect you to have at least 2 classes for your project. You can have more than 2. So you can see how that would be, written with the classes. Okay. So here we actually have a multi-level. We have 3 generation. Okay. And then in the previous one, you have multiple and multi-level. It's a hybrid because these 2 are in the same level. And then you have a 3rd generation. Any question? All right, so let's answer some of the questions that we have. Let's look at the chat. When do we use classes and inheritance in the real world setting? Is the use mainly for database system? I'm not sure. So if you wanted to structure your data so that way it can access for specific reasons. So for example, I can have a list of, let's say, artists in the class A, and then I would have a list of songs in class B. So in the class C, I would have, let's say, the style of music. So what I can do is I can print to be able to access right? The data specifically through the inheritance of the classes. So in a way, yes, you wanted to be able to access the property of each class, and the way that we do it here is a lot of the time we're just printing out the data to show. But you can, so for example, like if you're looking at social network, Cynthia, social network, you have a user a profile, right? And you can allow that user to register for an account and maybe like upload pictures to share, kind of like Instagram. So what you can do is you can update, right, the part of that profile, the general information that's in one class. And then in the other classes, the objects can access different parts, such as some content that's related to the user's properties for that particular user profile. Okay, so I can have like the general user information in class A. I can have like, you know, possibly class B that's inheriting from class A, where it would still bring down the same information, but you can tie that back into like pictures, videos, images, etc. Okay. So yes, implementing database to be able to store records, that would be more relevant. But for the object oriented, what we're simply doing is just structure the class so that way we can access different properties, right? For various class. Okay. All right, so let's go through and answer the questions. It says, define a class, vehicle, include class suite, members, function, statement, display the description of two types of vehicle. The members are make, model, color, year, and price. Provide the screen capture of script and output. So it tells you here that you have a class, vehicle, and in it you would have your members would be make, model, color, year, and price. And then you would have the methods, okay, and various statements. So
So class shoot is method.
I'm sorry.
The class shoot is a method. You use function.
Yeah.
You ask
So
us to be
yeah.
function.
So you can, yeah, you have method. That's correct. Okay.
Okay.
Yeah. So you would define the method, which is the function, right? So here, this is an example of one,
Okay.
and you don't have to do it exactly like this.
Mhm.
But I just follow the requirement. I have a class called vehicle,
Mhm.
right? And
Okay.
then I have the constructor. I have self, make, model, color, and year. So in here, I would say that make is the self.make is make, self.model is model, self.color is color, and self.year is year. And you can do something like this, none. And then you can plug in the parameter, right? Because all that is, when I type the make, that will just be like a placeholder. So I can use my parameter here, right? So by practice, you would see that none is used here because there's nothing there, and then we can start plugging in the specific data. So if I wanted to make this for the user account, right, I can have name, age, address or phone number or email, and, you know, profession, etc. And then down here, I would be able to plug in the details in the parameter. So then we would define the method. We would say show info self, and you can call it anything you want. I chose to use show info. You can say, you know, display vehicle, whatever, right? Then we want to print self, make, model, color, and year. Then I have two objects. One is for my vehicle one, That's a Chevrolet Corvette red 2021. 2 is Ford Mustang black 2021. Then down here, and note that we start with a single class. There's no inheritance, right? So here I'm using the first object, and then I call on show info after I specify the parameter. So it's going to show for my first vehicle, it should say Chevrolet Corvette red 2021. For my second vehicle, it should say Ford Mustang black 2021. That's fine, Andrea. Okay, so let's run this. Okay, so as you can see, it gives me my Chevrolet Corvette red 2021, Ford Mustang black 2021. Okay, and you can use any parameter you like. Okay, your favorite car, Tesla, or if you have something more fancy, Lamborghini. Okay. So here I simply just use one class, and in that class I have two objects, V1 and V2. Okay. And then I call on the method or access that method for object 1 and object 2, V1 and V2. Any question for the first exercise? So that kind of gives you a review and it warms you up on what we're going to be doing. Okay, so this is my take on that one. So earlier we talked about the difference between class variable and instance variable. For the class variable, it's shared by all the class instances and objects. The instance variable, it's unique to the instance of a class. It's defined within the method and it will only be applicable for that class, for the instance of that class, I should say. Okay, so for number 2, we want to differentiate between the two, class variable and instance variable. Any question? And you can find this information again back in our notes, right? We talked a lot about that earlier. Okay. So no question on 1 or 2 or both. So there's 1. And then there's 2. Okay. Then for 3, okay, then we wanted to show whether the program consists of class or instance attributes. What do you think? So here you have a constructor. And under that, you would have self.model, self.color. And in the method show, you have self.model and self.color. Is this an instance or class attributes?
The car with the parentheses, no parameter inside.
Yeah. So this is a single class, or the car is the base, right? It's
Okay.
only one class. So you have class car. So you have the
If
constructor.
we don't put the parentheses, it's okay too. Just a class car. Okay.
Right.
We don't have that you said the children ground that.
Yeah. So yeah, no children on this one.
Mm.
So in this one, what you have is you have a class car. And here you have the constructor. Under that, you specify model and color. So which one is this? Is it the class attributes or instance attributes? For
This is just like homework, last class homework, right? Last week homework, we use this.
Right. Yeah,
Okay.
something like the last week.
Yeah.
Anybody have an idea of what these are? We looked at the example earlier, the difference between the two. Now, if I put a variable here, like let's say year, right? Then that's a whole different thing. So it asks you, determine if the program consists of class or instance attributes.
If you put a year on the top, that means global variable.
Yeah, so that would be your class. So if we put something here, right? If we put year is equal, then yes, that would change it. That will be your class attributes. But since this is under the constructor here and you're using self.model and self.color, right? It is instance attributes. Okay, it's for that instance only. Okay, it's only accessible for that instance. Question. Okay, because it says both objects have different self which contain their attributes. See? So the object is accessing the instance attributes there. Okay, questions. So I put instance attributes. Variables are defined by programmer. Each object has its own attributes. So as you can see, Ferrari is an object and Ferrari has these attributes. Audi is its own object and it has these attributes, blue and A4. Okay, so Michelle is correct. That's number 3. Any question? Okay. For number 4, it asks you to describe 4 types of inheritance, right? So single inheritance, you have a class or a subclass that inherits an attributes from the parent class. For the multi-level inheritance, you would have a subclass inherits from intermediate So in the multi-level, you would have a subclass, right, that inherits methods and attributes from the parent class, which is intermediate. Then the parents, which is then inherits from the grandparent, that would be your base class. So that means that you have multiple level, like 3 generations or 4 generations or more, right? Let me move it to the next page real quick. Then your multi-level, so I also put that there. So let's see. So multiple inheritance, the child class or subclass inherit methods and attributes from multiple classes. And they could be, the parent could have multiple parents. In that case, that will be, you know, you would have multiple parents or multiple grandparents. Then multi-level is when the class inherits a method and methods and attributes of other classes that also inherit from the base classes. The process is known as multi-level inheritance. So you have the base, the intermediate, or multiple levels of intermediate, and then you have the derived. Then you have the hierarchy. When a subclass inherits, I should say when multiple subclasses inherits from a base class. So you can have a one parent with 5 children, right? So you have one base and 5 of the intermediate class at the same level. Then that would be the hierarchy inheritance. And you will find this in the notes. I also included pictures, so it's easy for you to distinguish. So there's multiple inheritance. Okay. You can have one child from 2 parents, right? 2 base and 1 child. You can have a single parent, a single child inheritance. That's a single inheritance. You can have multi-level inheritance, multiple generations. So you have, you know, the base, the child, and the grandchild. So that's multi-level. Then you have hierarchy inheritance. That would be one parent with 5 children, or 2 children, or 4 children, whatever. So you can have different number of classes. So to really structure this, we have to think about the number of classes that we have and how we want the inheritance to carry through the classes. In the case where you have one parent and one child, you have a single. Where you have two parents and one child, you have multiple. Multi-level, when you have one parent, or yeah, one parent, one child, and possible multiple grandchildren. And then you have hierarchy inheritance, one parent with many children. Okay. Question. All right. So for the next 30 minutes, we're going to work on the last two. Again, this is not due until Friday. So if you want to spend some time looking it over before you turn it in, that's totally fine with me. So let's talk about number 5 and 6. So for 5, you want to write a program that contains a single inheritance. Person, class is a parent, okay? So we have a single inheritance, one parent, one child. Person, class is the parent, that's your base. And in it, it has the name attribute. Like, you know, could be first name, last name, full name, whatever you like. Then the second class, the subclass will be the child. It has the ID attribute. So employee ID. Then we would create an object in the employee class, and we would assign it name and ID, and we want to display properties. So once we have the program written, we would take a screen capture and output. Okay, so I would start with creating a person class first. Okay, and if you use the constructor, then you know in the employee class you have to use super. And in the constructor for the person class, I would have name attribute. Okay. Okay, you ready? So here is mine. Okay, let me pull this down a little bit. Oh, come on. Trying to drag it down so you can see everything together. Okay, so I have a class called person. Here I have a constructor, and I have a self.name none, right? You can use name, you can use full name, whatever, but for here I just use none. Then I have a second class called employee, and employee is a subclass of person, so you want to put the person in the parentheses there. That just tells it that this is a subclass of this. And again, you still have to have a constructor. So if you use constructor here, use a constructor for the second one. And then since it's a subclass, we wanted to put the super function. And for the second init, no self in the parameter, leave it empty. And then for the second part, the assignment asks us to have ID for the employee. Okay, after we have the two classes set up, we would create our object. So emp0 is going to be the object for the employee class. And then we would set up our parameter, right? So you have emp 0 name is able, emp0 ID is this number. Then we print. And when you print, you simply pass name and ID. Okay. So this first part is 1. Okay. And so this one, what I have done is this one right here, it assigns the values after object creation. You see the assignment here? That's one approach. Okay. One solution. And we simply use the assignment here. The second one, I use a parameter here. Okay. So in the second one, this is a second option, second solution. I again have a person class, constructor, and here I would use self and n, and self.name is n. For the subclass, it's class employee, and it is a subclass of person. Here's the constructor. And in this one, I want to use X and I. We have to use the super because it's a subclass of the other one. And on this one, I wanted to pass X. Okay, the second. Then my self ID is I. Here's my object, emp1. It's an object of employee class. Then I would put in my parameter for the name and the ID, and I print. Okay, so this one assigns a value during object creation. So when you create the object here, if you use the parameter, you're actually giving it the value while you're making it. In the other one, after you created the object, then you assign it the value, and it still works, just two different approaches so you can see. Okay, so I'm still getting the output. To show you real quick, able 9876 and then KC1234. Okay. Any question on number 5? Okay, so the program is fairly short, and even if you don't format the print, it should be like roughly 10-12 lines, right, if we're using the constructor. And in this one, we only need to have one object. Either we assign it or we use the parameter with it. Either way will work. Okay. And you don't want to assign it here. You wanted to assign it down here after you created the object. Okay. Because what if we wanted to have more object, right? Instead of assigning it here, we want to use it down here. So that way we can say that, you know, this is the property of the object. Says why is self.id none in the first part? What happened if you left that line out? Okay. So for this one, right, I'm using a second parameter, then I have to be able to specify that that parameter is, so the I is used there and the X is used there in the method. So I have to include the X here. What's used here and then what's used underneath. So when you're calling, when it's you using the property of the other class, so the X really represents this, okay, and the I represents the ID, okay. So the name is plugged in here and the ID, okay. So in my parameter, this is X and this is I, and X is going to reference, the object is going to access the N as for X. Okay, that's the name. So in the first one, I didn't have to use the X or the I, the X here, because we assign it after we made the object. We already said that, oh, name is Abel and ID number is this. Okay, so we don't have to, we're not using parameter. So the true difference in the second solution on how you use this is because it's parameter. Okay, placeholder for your parameter, that's what they are. Okay, question. So now you can see the difference, because I know last week you had questions about, you know, how, whether you should use assignment or you should use parameter, and then going back to, you know, why we should do certain things. It's really, you know, like hard coding is good for testing. And, you know, it's a good way for us to check out the functionality of our program and test the capability of our program. It really depends on the code. We can't really say that it's better or more efficient because it's the approach, not necessarily just the content of that. Okay. All right, let's talk about number 6, if you don't have any questions. Okay, I'll post this video tonight in case you want to go back and look at it on YouTube or in Zoom. Okay, so for number 6, it tells you to write a program that has multi-level inheritance. You have the school is the base class. That's the parent. The course is the intermediate class. That's the child. And the room is the derived class. That's going to be the grandchild, right? We have 3 classes. So we have school, course, and room. And we want to display, right, Intro to Python, room 16 MVC. Okay, not necessarily in that order. If you wanted to be in that order, that's fine. You just gotta access the class. So I wrote one real quick. So let me show you number 6. Okay. I think that's the lowest it's gonna go. I'm just gonna have to scroll down. All right. Okay, so I have a constructor under class school. This is your base class. Here's my constructor. And then I have self school name none. And I'm using assignment for this one. And then I have a second. So this one is my method. I define my method. Show school. And it's going to print school name. Then I have an intermediate class. This is a second class. and it's a subclass of school. It's called course, and it is a subclass of school. The constructor, so in the constructor, we want to use self there. And since it's a subclass, we wanted to put super dot init. And I'm doing assignment, so I don't need to pass any variable there. And then I have self course name is none. Okay, that kind of blueprint my instance variable. Then I have another method called show course. And under that method, I simply just gonna print self.course name, which came from here. Then for the third class, I have a class called room, and it's a subclass of course. This is the grandchild now, right? It's a subclass of the child. Constructor, since it's a subclass of course, we're gonna put super in it. Then we have self.room number is none. Then we define our method. And for our method, we just want to print out the room number. Okay. So here I have 3 classes. Here's the base class. Here's the intermediate class, which is a subclass of school. And this is the derived class, which is a subclass of the intermediate. 3 generation. Then I have an object, which is part of the room class. Then I use that object to assign school name is MVC. Then use the object to access the course name and assign it Intro to Python. Use that object to access the room number and assign it 16. And then lastly, I simply just call objects dot show room, show school, show course, and show room. And if we run this, oh, it did come out just so low on the bottom. There you go. It says MVC Intro to Python 16, and I can change it up depending on the order, but I just have the school name, the course name, and the room. Okay, any question? Very easy. So after this, you should be able to say, oh, classes, simple. I can do it. Okay. Now, in the past, some of the students, they use it for their project effectively. When I taught Java, you know, I require a class there, so they can do a class for customer order and then a class for other things. So, so that's, you can think about how you want to design your program. It's your program, so you can create it, you know, to how you think it's going to flow. So you kind of have to kind of outline it first, write the pseudocode, basically outline it in English first on how it's going to flow, and then you can put it together. Okay. Any question as far as number 6 or 5? Okay. So with the rest of the time, I want to touch on the project real quick in case you have questions. I know I put it up already, and so I want to give you time to look at it, and then we can address any questions as we go along. Okay, and then next week we'll talk about UI and some libraries that would relate to your project. And I put some resources in the document for you, so you can start looking at it if you're thinking about, you know, the project, if you decide to change your mind, you can look at the resources first, right? However you wanted to do this. So let's talk about our course project. So I had originally put it all in one document, and then I separated it into different parts for you so you can submit it. So in this project, you're going to choose one from the 3 options. If you choose to work in team, you know, let me know, and then you can only work with another person, since I think the project is good with 2 people doing it. When 3 or 4 people get together, then, you know, you're gonna have somebody not doing much. So I like if you can work with another person if you wish. If you want to work by yourself, that's fine. You have to submit each part on Canvas, and there's specific requirement for each part. So in the option 1, I want you to create a program that set appointments for a business of your choice. Now, scheduling programs are a little harder to do. I just want to let you know. However, we can use a calendar library, right? And then you can interface. Now, you can choose any business of your choice. You should choose a business of your choice, because that way you would focus on things in specific. Like car repair would take a certain amount of hours, right? And you want to incorporate that in how you ask the user to select. Okay, doctor's visit, salons, restaurants. And these are just some of the example. And if you can think of anything outside of that, that's fine. Okay, so this is a set appointment application. And even things like for home repair, shipping, whatever you could think of. Now, the program should allow the user to select the date and the time from the available options. And I like for you to think about how people can pre-schedule multiple events. So for example, like I want to schedule my oil change this month, and 3 months from now, I wanted to do some maintenance on my car, like transmission flush or something a little bit more major, like brakes, things like that, right? Like, is your program capable of doing that? And it needs to have a 1-year span. So if you're thinking about, oh, I'm just going to make it from this date, like a short range of date, that's going to be very limited, right? So there's options with calendar library that you can use with Python. And the whole point in this is to expand your scope to beyond this class and applying the concept that we learn in this class. And so you can make your program into something useful, and you can package it, and you can sell it to business or share it with, you know, the community on the internet. Okay. So the technical things that I'm going to look for when I'm looking at your project, it's the same across all 3. And there's different point weighted for each of the area from the beginning until the end. Okay, some are weighted more than others. In the case, I feel that, you know, that it would require a little bit more effort or you know, more knowledge and skills. So comments, I don't need you to comment every line, but just comment throughout different sections. It's a good way to, you know, maintain your notes and your comments through the program, so you can go back to it to troubleshoot. So it's really for you, okay? So I need to see some form of container, list variables. If you want to use tuple in dictionary, that's fine, right? And with that, if you're using the larger container, likely you have to implement the loop so you can iterate. So I will look for that as well. Some kind of string object to display. Remember we talked about, you know, if we slice it, if we, you know, so it really depends on your program on how you design it. So I wanted to see some kind of string object being implemented for display. That's easy. Format it make it look nice. Okay. I need to have 2 or more functions, and you can implement the method with the class, so that way, you know, so it needs to have some kind of call to execute the task. That's 20 points. You can use both loops or one or the other. It all depends. So if you want to use while and for, that's okay. If you just want to use for, that's going to be fine. So if you use it correctly and effectively, you just automatically earn 10 points there, right? Like if I use it to access lists or append something, whatever, that will be good. Okay. Some form of conditional statement, and this is important with calendars because if it's, you know, if they select something, so you have to tell the system, right, to really present only the options that's available. And when you test this, I want you to just test it from a perspective that if something is already selected, if they select it again, it should give them some form of message, right? So if I'm trying to select a holiday, it's going to say, sorry, we're closed, right? If I'm selecting something that's, you know, a day that's not available, it should say something like that. So definitely conditional statement needs to be implemented. Okay. I want a non-built-in module. You have to create a module. You don't have to be super fancy with the module, like, you know, you can make it really extensive if you like, but think of it how you can reuse that module for other purposes. We did a few practice with just setting it up where, you know, you can have it just file print, etc. So you can do something like that. So I will look for a custom module. So when you send me the part for the file, I need the module and your main program. Okay, you can put it in one folder and zip it, so that way when I open it, it's all together, right? That would be best. And so that's how you should package it, okay, together in the same directory. All right. I need to find 2 classes at least 2 classes, and I wanted to see at least 1 subclass. That's going to be 20 points. Okay. And with the subclass, you have to use the proper inheritance. I didn't spell it out here, but that's what I'm going to look for. And then you wanted to catch exceptions. Okay, you don't have to make it super extensive. Just one small section is okay. What kind of exceptions do you expect? I just wanted to see how you think as a programmer or as somebody that write the script. And then file operation implementation, input and output. So you have to open, write, or append to the file, right? You can have it read and then close. So I will look for those things, 20 points. And if you integrate UI, you will earn 30 points. Now, if you have perfect or close to perfect for everything, then that 30 points can go into something else, right? But this gives you a challenge to look beyond this class. What can you do with what you learn and make it happen? So next week, I'll spend a little bit of time lecture on Monday to go over UI and library to help you. And then also you kind of have to think about how you want to approach it if the library that I'm giving you is suitable. So I'll give you some of the main ones, and then you can research and implement it. Okay. The second option is going to be a poker game. You have an option to do Texas Hold'em or Pot Limit or Omaha. That's the same name. Okay. And if you know Texas Hold'em, you can do that. If you don't know how to play poker, you can also look up general definition or watch a video on how it's played so you can have an idea, right? Because sometimes when you get hired for a job, it might not be something that you want to write. You're going to work on project that it's going to expand above your scope. Like you don't gamble, you don't know about gambling, but what if you get a job as a programmer at a casino, right? So you have to think about your capability and how you can expand your skill. And that's the whole purpose in this. So you can push your limit a little bit and see what you can do. So the same requirement as the other one, but in your poker game, I want you to be able to have the dealer or the player, and once they're dealt with their hands, they're going to be able to select the best card hands. Okay, so if I'm dealt with a certain number of cards, I can select from my cards. I need to be able to wage my bet, right? And I can fold or stop and continue the game against a dealer. Okay, so the program should output some file that contains each round outcome, winnings or losses throughout. Okay, so after each round, you should ask the user if they want to continue, and if they do, right, then it's going to deal and it's still going to have that. But at the end, we wanted to write that to file. Okay, so the same technical requirements as the option 1. And then option 3 is the bird study. So instead of doing all five species, I thought about it and I want you to do only 2 and compare one to the other. It's easier. Plus, it's just way too much data. Like for the biology class, I think Dr. Warner Frederick, she actually have each student select 1 species. So for our program purpose, I think we wanted to compare 1 species with the other for the migration. So here it gives you a little bit of background on their biology lab. It's looking at the temperature changes from 1940s to the current day, and it really impacts different type of birds. So we wanted to look at how the temperatures had led to the shifts in species distributions. Some birds migrate to the south sooner than the other species because of change in temperature. So the website you can access is here. The 5 species that she requested are there. You can select 2 from the 5, okay, of your choice. Then what you're going to do is you're going to go to the website, and then you are going to make a user account. You can use your student email for that. Select the species of your choice, right? And then you're going to search. Okay, if you just be careful with the autocorrect, sometimes it plugs something else in. Your search will appear on the right, and you would click on the best matches. Okay, and then you can, sorry, disregard this. She had it downloaded to the map and the slider, but what you want to do is you wanted to download that data file. Okay. And then what you have to think about is how you're going to be able to import that file in. So I definitely would write a method and call it, right, to pull the data and to plot the data. So for plotting data, I have given you this, but if you bought the book for this class, the book 2 is data analysis, and it goes over some of these things. Okay, so if you have the whole book, look at this, the book 2, which is after our content. It talks about seaborne data analysis, so that will be useful. But I put the link for each one so you can read their documentation. So to plot the data for the chosen species, you can use these libraries. Okay, Pygal, Altair. A lot of people use Seaborn, Plotly. So there are quite a few libraries you can implement.
Which
But
one would you
not
recommend?
just to I've worked with Pygal, Altair, and Seaborn. I haven't used Matplotlib. This is mainly used for a lot of mathematics programs. So I want you to check it out and read about how easy it is to implement.
Okay.
But yeah, I looked at some of the example for something like your project. They use Seaborn, but Pygal is basic too. So look at those, okay? but your program needs to do the comparison between the two species. So not just to plot, but to look at, you know, you can scope it down from 1940 to our current day, you know, and then you can have some kind of output on how the bird species have changed, has shifted. And it could be location too. You know, they have moved over to different continents, and that kind of changes the habitat, the eco habitats in the surrounding area. So so we can, you know, and then you can make conclusive finding. Now, if you come across statistical questions and things that we can't resolve in the class, we want to talk to the statistic class, and they're covering intervals right now. So I'm waiting for Gabriella to give me some details, but you know, they said that they could help you with some of the statistical questions in case. So if you opt to do this project, that is, okay. And this, the parts for this, we have 2 minutes. So part 1, okay, I put the part 1 in here, and there's a rubric already built. Okay, so 50 points for each part. I want a page double space to identify your program goals, functionality, target audience, like who should be using your program, weaknesses and strength, and what do you want to improve for future improvement. So I know that this is due before the end, but when you start writing your program, you can think about this, right? We always expect flaw from software end, so think about how you want to improve it. Maybe scale it out for more species of birds, or, you know, to be able to use this, whatever you think would be suitable. I need a pseudocode of the program. So in plain English, from start to the end, how your program should be flowing, 50 points. And you can edit it throughout, right? So put together a skeleton and then start adding some stuff in there. Part 1, this is due November 22nd. Okay, so if we get it done before then, we don't have to worry about it. Part 2, okay, I need you to submit your Python files, not just one, but if you're writing a module, I need the module too. So put it in a zip folder and upload it. That's easy. And all the weighted requirements is already been shown in each option. That's 200 points. So I use a rubric when I grade these things. So I would go through, if it's not there, 0. If it's there, somewhat working, partial points, right? And it takes me a long time just to go through even a small class, because I look at all the components and I grade it based on the rubric. So when you look at your grade at the end, after I post it, usually I would add comments in there if I find something that you can fix, or if it's great, I would say something in there. So, okay. Lastly, one more thing. I know it's 4 o'clock and some of you want to leave. You have to do a self-evaluation if you're working by yourself, and if you're working with the team. On that form, you have to do both. Okay, the link to that is here. Okay, once you submit this, take a screen capture. I don't need all the answers on here. I will get it on an Excel or on a spreadsheet through Google. Okay, like, and some of this is what I use to evaluate the team members, whether they're holding up their end, and how you enjoy working with teams, and so forth. Okay, so fill this out. You have to assess yourself as well. And be honest, you know, if you give yourself a 5, it doesn't always mean that I will give you 50% of 100. All of that is I just wanted to see what areas you need to improve in, right? And so if you're able to recognize that. The second thing is going to be your portfolio. So once you have all your project ready to go, right, put together a portfolio using Google site. It's really nice. It's very easy to use. So I link it to the tutorial here for you to create your Google site if you haven't done one. And you can, you know, create a little button link and tie it to your LinkedIn or whatever other GitHub, etc. Write your code if you want. You can put it on GitHub and then connect it to your ePortfolio. So when you submit this part, I need a screen capture of your submitted survey. I need a URL of your portfolio. There will be a URL section. See how it says website URL or file upload? You can, but make sure we test the URL, please, and make sure it's published before you submit it. Because even if you create and you don't publish it, I cannot see it. And if I cannot see it, it's a 0. So please make sure that you test it, right? Publish it and test it. 25 points, 25 points. Together, that's 50 points. Okay. Any question? Okay. So I'll pull the attendance from the participation list from today. If you feel like you want to type in your name, you can, but usually I get that. I want to do my car control program from Pike for my car creation for the project base 11. I do not. Yeah, I can. Cynthia, can you send me some information on that? I just want to make sure that it meets the student learning objectives in the course outline, Cynthia. Okay, so drop me an email, Cynthia, of what they had you working from the base 11 and all of that good stuff, and then from there I kind of have to see. So if you have a custom project you want to pursue, I need to take a look at it and see if how that works. But you're still going to be graded based on the rubric that is standard for everybody, right? The 200 points, the portfolio, all the parts. So it's just going to be a different outcome for the program. Okay, so keep in mind that yes, you can do a custom project, just gotta make sure that all the parts are submitted the same, because it's equity for everybody. Okay, have a good evening. I will see some of you in the next class. Enjoy your evening and send email if you have questions. Thank you.